Lisa had always dreamed of having her own little piece of paradise. After years of saving every penny and working double shifts at the local hospital as a nurse, she finally bought her corner house in Sunset Ridge community 3 years ago. The house wasn't much to look at back then, just a basic 2-bedroom with a tiny yard that looked more like a patch of weeds than a garden. But Lisa had big dreams. She could see what others couldn't. Where neighbors saw dead grass and bare dirt, she imagined colorful flowers dancing in the breeze. Where others saw an empty corner lot, she pictured a peaceful retreat that would make everyone smile when they walked by. The first year was tough. Lisa worked her regular shifts at the hospital, then came home and worked until dark in her yard. Her hands got rough and dirty. Her back ached. Some days she wondered if she was crazy for spending her weekends digging holes and planting seeds instead of relaxing like normal people. Slowly, things started to change. The grass grew green and thick. The flower beds filled with bright colors: red roses, yellow sunflowers, purple lavender that smelled like heaven. Lisa built stone pathways that curved through her garden like a fairy tale. She added a small pond where goldfish swam in circles, their orange bodies flashing in the sunlight. Neighbors started noticing. Mrs. Peterson from next door would walk her dog past Lisa's house twice a day, just to see what new flowers had bloomed. The kids from down the street would stop and count the fish in the pond on their way to school. Even grumpy old Mr. Williams, who complained about everything, admitted that Lisa's garden was not too bad. The real magic happened in year 2. Lisa saved up enough money to install a beautiful iron gate at the entrance to her property. It wasn't just any gate. This one had elegant curves and delicate flower patterns worked into the metal. When the morning sun hit it just right, it cast pretty shadows on the pathway below. The gate served a practical purpose too. Lisa's corner lot was right next to the community walking trail, and people often cut through her garden as a shortcut. While she didn't mind visitors who wanted to enjoy the flowers, some folks weren't careful. They stepped on her plants, left trash behind, and let their dogs dig holes in her flower beds. The gate solved these problems perfectly. It had a wide opening during the day so people could still walk through and enjoy the garden. But Lisa could close it when needed to protect her plants. She even put up a small sign that said, "Please stay on the stone paths. Thank you for helping keep our garden beautiful." Most people loved the new setup. Families would bring their kids to see the fish and smell the flowers. Couples walking their dogs would stop to take pictures. The local newspaper even wrote a small article about Lisa's hidden gem garden, calling it a bright spot that brings joy to the whole neighborhood. Lisa felt proud every time she came home from work. Her house had become more than just a place to sleep. It was a real home. She had created something beautiful that made other people happy too. On summer evenings, she would sit on her small porch with a cup of tea, watching neighbors walk by and smile at her flowers. The garden became Lisa's stress reliever after long days at the hospital. Working with her hands in the dirt helped her forget about difficult patients and workplace drama. When she planted new bulbs in the fall, she felt hopeful about spring. When she watered her flowers in the morning, she started each day with a sense of purpose. By year 3, Lisa's corner property had completely transformed the whole block. Other neighbors started working on their own yards, inspired by what one person could accomplish with dedication and hard work. Property values in the area went up. Real estate agents started using Lisa's house as a selling point when showing homes to potential buyers. The Homeowners Association had been supportive throughout the whole process. When Lisa first proposed installing the gate, the previous board president, a kind woman named Betty, had encouraged her. "We need more people like you who care about making our community beautiful," Betty had said. The approval process was simple and friendly. Lisa even started a small informal garden club with a few neighbors. They would share seeds, trade plants, and help each other with big projects. On weekends, you could often find 3 or 4 neighbors working together, pulling weeds or planting new flowers. Children would join in too, learning about different types of plants and how to take care of them. The pond became especially popular with kids. Lisa bought special fish food and let children feed the goldfish on weekends. She taught them the names of different flowers and showed them how butterflies and bees helped plants grow. Some kids started drawing pictures of the garden and bringing them to show Lisa. Everything seemed perfect. Lisa had created exactly what she dreamed of, a beautiful space that brought joy to herself and others. She felt like she was contributing something positive to the world, one flower at a time. Her garden had become a gathering place where neighbors got to know each other, and children could connect with nature. The gate stood as a symbol of care and protection. It wasn't meant to keep people out, but to help preserve something beautiful for everyone to enjoy. Lisa had found the perfect balance between sharing her creation with the community while protecting it from damage. She never imagined that this peaceful paradise she had worked so hard to create would soon become the center of a neighborhood battle. She never thought that the gate which brought her so much pride and solved so many problems would become something controversial. In her mind, she was just a nurse who loved flowers and wanted to make her corner of the world a little bit brighter. But sometimes, even the most innocent and beautiful things can become targets when the wrong people gain power. Lisa's perfect haven was about to be threatened in ways she never saw coming. The garden that had brought so much happiness to so many people was about to become a battlefield, and Lisa would have to decide just how far she was willing to go to protect the dream she had spent 3 years building with her own 2 hands. It was a Tuesday morning in early March when everything changed for Lisa. She had just finished her night shift at the hospital and was looking forward to spending some time in her garden. The daffodils were starting to bloom, and she wanted to check on the new rose bushes she had planted the week before. As she pulled into her driveway, tired but happy to be home, she noticed something unusual. A white van was parked outside her house and a uniformed mail carrier was walking back toward it. This seemed odd because regular mail didn't usually come until afternoon. Lisa got out of her car and waved to the mail carrier. "Everything okay?" she called out. The woman turned around and walked back toward Lisa, holding a thick envelope. "Are you Lisa Johnson?" she asked, checking the name on the envelope. "Yes, that's me," Lisa replied, suddenly feeling a knot forming in her stomach. Something about this felt wrong. "I have a certified letter for you. I need you to sign here," the mail carrier said, handing Lisa a small electronic device. Lisa signed with shaky fingers, wondering what could be so important that it needed to be delivered by certified mail. Had something happened to a family member? Was there a problem at work? Her mind raced through possibilities as she took the thick envelope. "Have a good day," the mail carrier said, walking back to her van. Lisa stood in her driveway staring at the envelope. The return address made her heart sink. Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association, Board of Directors. The envelope felt heavy in her hands, and she had a terrible feeling about what might be inside. She walked slowly to her front door, put her keys in the lock, and went inside. Her house felt different somehow, like a storm was coming. Lisa sat down at her kitchen table and carefully opened the envelope. The letter was typed on official letterhead with fancy borders and the HOA logo at the top. But the words inside were anything but friendly. "Dear Ms. Johnson, this letter serves as official notice that your property gate installation violates newly revised community standards as outlined in Section 4.2b of the updated Sunset Ridge HOA guidelines. The gate structure you have installed creates an impediment to community pedestrian access and must be removed immediately. You have 30 days from the date of this letter to completely remove the gate and restore full public access to the corner pathway. Failure to comply will result in daily fines of $200, $200 per day until the violation is corrected. This decision is final and not subject to appeal." Lisa read the letter 3 times, each time hoping she had misunderstood something. But the message was crystal clear. The HOA wanted her gate gone, and they were threatening massive fines if she didn't comply. Her hands were shaking as she put the letter down on the table. $200 a day. That was more than she made in a single shift at the hospital. In just 1 week, the fines would cost her more than her monthly mortgage payment. But what confused Lisa even more was the mention of newly revised community standards. When had these standards been changed? She had received approval for her gate just 2 years ago from the previous HOA board. Betty, the old president, had been so supportive and encouraging. Lisa picked up the letter again and looked for any explanation of when these new rules had been made. There was no mention of a community meeting, no date when residents were notified, no information about how or when these changes were approved. It was as if these new rules had appeared out of thin air. She walked to her kitchen window and looked out at her beautiful gate. Just yesterday, the Martinez family had stopped to admire her early spring flowers and take pictures. The children had counted the fish in her pond while their parents complimented her on creating such a lovely space for the community to enjoy. Now, suddenly this same gate that brought so much joy to her neighbors was being called a violation and an impediment. Lisa couldn't understand how something that had been legal and celebrated just days ago could now be considered a problem. She picked up her phone and called her neighbor Janet, who lived 2 houses down. Janet had been one of the founding members of their informal garden club and had always been supportive of Lisa's improvements to the property. "Janet, it's Lisa. I just got the strangest letter from the HOA," she said when Janet answered. "Oh, honey, you got one too," Janet replied, her voice sounding worried. "I was hoping they wouldn't send you one." "You knew about this?" Lisa asked, feeling even more confused. "There was a board meeting last month. They sent out notices, but honestly, most people didn't pay much attention. The new board president, Robert Shaw, pushed through a bunch of new rules. I didn't think they would affect you since your gate was already approved." Lisa felt like the ground was shifting under her feet. A new board president? New rules? How had she missed all of this? "Janet, I never got a notice about any meeting." "When did this happen?" "It was on a Wednesday night in February. To be honest, Lisa, only about 12 people showed up. Most folks were probably at home having dinner with their families. The notices were pretty basic. They just said routine board meeting without mentioning any major rule changes." Lisa's heart sank even further. It sounded like this new board had deliberately kept the meeting low-key to avoid community input on their changes. "Who is this Robert Shaw? I don't think I've ever met him," Lisa asked. "He moved here about 6 months ago and immediately got involved with the HOA. He's retired from some big company and seems to have very strong opinions about how the neighborhood should look." At the meeting, he kept talking about property values and uniform standards. After hanging up with Janet, Lisa sat in her kitchen feeling overwhelmed. Just an hour ago, her biggest worry had been whether her roses would survive a late frost. Now she was facing daily fines that could bankrupt her if she didn't destroy the thing she was most proud of. She looked at the letter again and noticed something else troubling. At the bottom, in small print, it said, "This decision is final and not subject to appeal." That didn't seem right. Didn't homeowners have rights? Didn't they get a chance to defend themselves before being forced to tear down improvements they had made with proper approval? Lisa had always been a rule follower. As a nurse, she understood the importance of following procedures and respecting authority. But this felt different. This felt like someone was using rules as a weapon against her, not as a way to help the community. She walked outside and stood by her gate, running her hands along the smooth iron curves. Tomorrow she would start researching her options. She would find out what her rights were and whether this new board had followed proper procedures. She would talk to her neighbors and see if others were facing similar problems. But tonight she just wanted to stand in her garden and remember why she had worked so hard to create this beautiful space. The evening sun was casting those familiar pretty shadows through her gate, and the early spring flowers were starting to show their colors. This was her home, her dream, her contribution to making the world a little bit more beautiful, and she wasn't going to let it go without a fight. Lisa spent the next 3 days gathering information and preparing for what she hoped would be a reasonable conversation with the new HOA board. She printed out copies of her original gate approval from 2 years ago, took photos of her property showing how well-maintained everything was, and even collected signatures from neighbors who supported keeping the gate. The response was overwhelming. Out of 50 houses she visited, 47 families signed her petition. People wrote comments like, "Lisa's garden brings joy to our whole neighborhood," and "The gate protects this beautiful space for everyone to enjoy." Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who walked past Lisa's house every morning, wrote, "This garden is the highlight of my daily walk." Armed with this evidence and community support, Lisa felt confident as she walked into the community center on Thursday evening for the emergency HOA board meeting she had requested. The room was much fuller than usual. Word had spread about Lisa's situation, and many neighbors had come to show their support. But the moment Lisa saw the new board president, Robert Shaw, she realized this wasn't going to be the friendly discussion she had hoped for. Shaw was a tall, stern-looking man in his 60s wearing an expensive suit. He sat at the head of the long table like a judge, with 4 other board members arranged on either side of him. This meeting will come to order, Shaw announced, banging a wooden gavel on the table. We are here to address Ms. Johnson's request to discuss her gate violation. However, I want to make it clear from the start that our decision is final and not open for debate. Lisa felt her heart sink, but she stood up anyway. Mr. Shaw, I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me. I brought documentation showing that my gate was properly approved by the previous board, and I have a petition signed by 47 neighbors who support keeping it. Shaw barely glanced at the papers Lisa held out. Ms. Johnson, what the previous board did or didn't do is irrelevant. We have new standards now, and your gate violates those standards. The matter is closed. But sir, Lisa persisted, could you help me understand what specific problem the gate is causing? It's been there for 2 years without any complaints. Shaw's face hardened. The problem, Ms. Johnson, is that your gate creates an elitist barrier that divides our community. It sends a message that some properties are more important than others. In a proper community, all pathways should be equally accessible to all residents. Lisa was stunned by this response. But the gate is open during the day, and there's a sign welcoming people to enjoy the garden. It's only closed at night to protect the plants from damage. That's exactly the problem, Shaw replied, his voice getting louder. You've appointed yourself as the gatekeeper of community access. Who gave you the right to decide when people can and cannot use a public pathway? Tom Bradley, one of Lisa's neighbors, stood up from the audience. Excuse me, Mr. Shaw, but that pathway runs through Lisa's private property. She has every right to control access to her own land. Shaw turned his cold stare toward Tom. Mr. Bradley, residents may observe this meeting, but only board members may speak. Please sit down. Now wait just a minute, called out Janet from the back of the room. This is supposed to be a community meeting. Don't we get a say in decisions that affect our neighborhood? Other neighbors began speaking up, expressing their support for Lisa and questioning why the board was being so rigid about a gate that everyone loved. The room began to buzz with conversations as people turned to each other, sharing their frustration with Shaw's attitude. Shaw banged his gavel repeatedly. Order, order! This is not a town hall meeting. This is a board meeting to inform Ms. Johnson of our decision, nothing more. Lisa tried one more time. Mr. Shaw, I understand you have concerns, but could we find a compromise? Maybe I could modify the gate or change the hours when it's open? There is no compromise, Shaw stated firmly. The gate represents everything that's wrong with property owners who think they're above community standards. You've created an exclusive garden club. You've restricted access to community pathways, and you've set yourself up as some kind of neighborhood authority. This ends now. The accusations hit Lisa like a slap in the face. Everything Shaw was saying was the opposite of what she had tried to create. Her garden was meant to bring people together, not divide them. The gate was meant to protect something beautiful for everyone to enjoy, not to exclude anyone. Board member Patricia Wells, a middle-aged woman who had remained quiet until now, finally spoke up. Robert, I've driven past Ms. Johnson's property many times, and I have to say it's quite lovely. Perhaps we could consider... Shaw cut her off immediately. Patricia, we've already discussed this in executive session. The decision is made. He turned back to Lisa. Ms. Johnson, you have 27 days remaining to remove the gate. Each day after that will cost you $200. I suggest you start making arrangements. Lisa felt tears forming in her eyes, but she was determined not to cry in front of this man. Mr. Shaw, this gate and garden represent 3 years of my life. I've put everything I have into creating something beautiful for this community. I work night shifts at the hospital to pay for these improvements. This isn't about being elitist, it's about caring for something special. Your personal financial choices are not the community's responsibility, Shaw replied coldly. And frankly, Ms. Johnson, your garden is exactly the kind of individualistic display that creates inequality in our neighborhood. Some residents can't afford elaborate landscaping, and your property makes their yards look inferior by comparison. The room erupted. Neighbors were shouting over each other, expressing outrage at Shaw's suggestion that Lisa should be punished for making her property beautiful. Even some of the other board members looked uncomfortable with Shaw's harsh words. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman who walked her dog past Lisa's house every day, stood up shakily. Young man, she said, pointing a finger at Shaw, I've lived in this neighborhood for 30 years, and Lisa's garden is the best thing that's happened here in decades. You should be thanking her, not attacking her. Shaw's face was turning red with anger. This meeting is over, he announced, standing up abruptly. Ms. Johnson, you have your answer. Remove the gate or face the consequences. As the board members filed out of the room, neighbors surrounded Lisa, offering support and encouragement. Many people were visibly angry about how Shaw had treated her. "This isn't over, Lisa," Tom Bradley said firmly. "There are ways to fight this kind of abuse of power." "We're behind you 100%, added Janet. "That man has no right to destroy something so beautiful, just because he has control." Issues, but as Lisa walked home that night, she felt more discouraged than ever. Shaw wasn't interested in compromise or community input. He seemed personally offended by her garden's success and was determined to tear it down, regardless of what the neighbors wanted. She stood by her gate in the darkness, looking at the shadows cast by the streetlights. Tomorrow she would start researching her legal options. She would find out if there were ways to challenge the board's authority. She would learn about property rights and HOA regulations. Because one thing had become crystal clear during that hostile meeting. Robert Shaw wasn't just trying to enforce rules. He was trying to make an example of her. He wanted to show the entire community that no one should dare to create something special without his permission. And Lisa was beginning to realize that this fight was about much more than just her gate. It was about whether one person with a title could bully an entire community into submission. It was about whether neighbors had any say in decisions that affected their daily lives. The battle lines had been drawn, and Lisa knew she was in for the fight of her life. The day after the disastrous board meeting, Lisa called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. She wasn't physically ill, but she knew she needed time to figure out how to fight back against Shaw's ultimatum. 26 days wasn't much time to find a solution, and she couldn't afford to waste a single hour. Lisa had never considered herself a legal expert, but desperation was pushing her to learn fast. She started by visiting the county courthouse where a helpful clerk named David showed her how to access property records and HOA documents. What she found there was the first piece of good news she'd had in days. Her property deed included something called an easement agreement that she had never really understood before. According to the legal language, when the original developer built Sunset Ridge 25 years ago, he had granted Lisa's corner lot special rights to control pedestrian access through the pathway that crossed her property. "This is interesting," David said, studying the document over his reading glasses. "It looks like your property has what we call a conditional easement. The public can use the pathway, but the property owner, that's you, has the legal right to control how it's used." Lisa felt a spark of hope. "So the HOA can't just order me to remove my gate?" "Well, I'm not a lawyer," David cautioned, "but this document suggests you have rights that might override HOA regulations. You should definitely have an attorney look at this." Next, Lisa spent hours at the public library, researching HOA laws and regulations. She learned that homeowners associations were supposed to follow specific procedures when making rule changes. They were required to notify all residents in advance, hold open meetings, and allow community input before voting on major changes. The more she read, the more suspicious she became about how Shaw's new rules had been implemented. According to state law, HOA boards were supposed to mail written notices to all homeowners at least 14 days before any meeting where rule changes would be discussed. They were also required to provide specific details about proposed changes, not just vague language about routine board business. Lisa dug deeper into the requirements and discovered something that made her heart race with excitement. When HOA boards made major changes to community guidelines, they were supposed to give homeowners a chance to petition for a community-wide vote if enough residents disagreed with the board's decision. She drove home and immediately called Janet to ask about the February meeting where Shaw had pushed through his new rules. "Janet, tell me exactly what the meeting notice said when Shaw announced his rule changes." "Oh, honey, it was barely anything. Just a little postcard that said HOA board meeting, February 15th, Community Center, 7 p.m., routine business." Most people probably threw it away without thinking twice. Lisa felt another surge of hope. Did Shaw explain the specific rule changes at the meeting? Did he give people a chance to ask questions or voice concerns? Not really. He basically just read through a list of new rules and said they were effective immediately. When Mrs. Rodriguez tried to ask a question about the landscaping changes, he told her the decisions were final and not open for discussion. This was exactly what Lisa had hoped to hear. According to everything she had read, Shaw's board had violated multiple procedural requirements when implementing their new rules. The inadequate notice, the lack of community input, and the refusal to allow appeals were all potential violations of state HOA regulations. But Lisa knew she needed professional help to make sense of all this legal information. She spent the next day calling attorneys, looking for someone who specialized in property rights and HOA disputes. Most of the lawyers she contacted were either too expensive or too busy to take her case on short notice. Finally, she found Amanda Foster, a young attorney who had recently started her own practice, focusing on helping homeowners fight unfair HOA actions. Amanda agreed to meet with Lisa that evening to review her documents. "This is very promising," Amanda said, studying Lisa's property deed and the HOA meeting records. "Your easement rights are clearly documented, and it looks like the board violated several procedural requirements when they changed their rules. So I have a chance to fight this?" Lisa asked hopefully. "More than a chance. Based on what you've shown me, I think we can challenge both the validity of their new rules and their authority to override your property rights." Amanda paused, looking at Lisa seriously. "But I have to warn you, this could get expensive and time-consuming. HOA boards don't like being challenged, and they often have more resources to spend on legal battles than individual homeowners." Lisa thought about her savings account, which had already been depleted by 3 years of garden improvements. "How much are we talking about? I can work with you on payment plans, but you should expect this to cost several $1,000s if it goes to court. And there's no guarantee we'll win, even though I think we have a strong case." That night, Lisa sat in her garden thinking about her options. Several $1,000s was more money than she had readily available. She could borrow against her house, but that would put her home at risk. She could ask family members for help, but most of them were struggling financially too. On the other hand, if she lost her gate, she would also lose the thing that protected her garden from damage. Without the gate, she would probably have to give up most of her beautiful landscaping because it wouldn't survive constant foot traffic and careless visitors. As she was weighing her options, her phone rang. It was Tom Bradley, her neighbor who had spoken up at the board meeting. "Lisa, I've been thinking about your situation, and I want to help. My brother-in-law is a retired paralegal, and he's been looking into HOA regulations since our meeting. He thinks you might have a really strong case." "That's encouraging, Tom, but I'm not sure I can afford to hire an attorney." "Well, that's actually why I'm calling. A bunch of us neighbors have been talking, and we want to help you fight this. It's not just about your gate anymore. It's about whether Shaw can steamroll the entire community whenever he feels like it." Lisa was touched by the offer, but she didn't want to take money from her neighbors. "I appreciate that, Tom, but I can't ask people to pay for my legal battle." "You're not asking, we're offering. And besides, this affects all of us. If Shaw can force you to tear down your gate without following proper procedures, what's to stop him from targeting other people's improvements next?" Tom made a good point. Several neighbors had made significant improvements to their properties over the past few years. If Shaw could arbitrarily change the rules and force people to undo their work, no one's investments were safe. "How many people are willing to help?" Lisa asked. "So far, 18 families have committed to contributing. We're not talking about huge amounts, maybe $50 or $100 per family. But together it might be enough to hire that attorney you found." Lisa felt tears forming in her eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than frustration. She had been feeling so alone in this fight. But now she realized that her neighbors saw this battle as their battle too. The next morning, Lisa called Amanda Foster back and hired her to challenge the HOA's actions. They would argue that Shaw's board had violated state regulations when implementing their new rules, and that Lisa's property rights gave her the authority to maintain her gate, regardless of HOA preferences. As she hung up the phone, Lisa felt more confident than she had since receiving that terrible certified letter. She had legal representation, community support, and documented evidence that the board had overstepped their authority. But she also knew that Shaw wouldn't give up easily. He had made it clear that he saw her gate as a symbol of everything he wanted to eliminate from the community. This wasn't just a legal dispute anymore. It was a battle for the soul of the neighborhood. Lisa looked at her calendar and counted the days remaining until Shaw's deadline. 22 days to either remove her gate or start facing daily fines. 22 days to prove that one determined homeowner could stand up to a bully with a title. The real fight was just beginning. March 30th arrived with a beautiful spring morning. Lisa's daffodils were in full bloom. The cherry tree was starting to show pink buds, and the goldfish in her pond were swimming actively in the warming water. It was the perfect kind of day that reminded her why she loved her garden so much. It was also the day Robert Shaw expected her gate to be gone. Lisa stood by her kitchen window at 7 in the morning, drinking coffee and watching her gate stand exactly where it had been for the past 2 years. She had made her decision. The gate wasn't going anywhere. Amanda Foster had filed their legal challenge 3 days earlier, arguing that the HOA board had violated proper procedures when implementing their new rules. They were also challenging the board's authority to override the easement rights clearly documented in Lisa's property deed. But legal processes take time, and Shaw's deadline didn't care about court schedules. At exactly 9 o'clock, Lisa's doorbell rang. She opened the door to find a young man in a polo shirt holding a clipboard and a camera. "Ms. Johnson, I'm Kevin from the HOA Compliance Department. I'm here to document the gate violation and initiate the fine process." Lisa had expected this visit, but it still made her nervous. "The gate is staying where it is," she said calmly. "My attorney has filed a legal challenge to the board's authority in this matter." Kevin looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I just take pictures and file reports. I don't make decisions about legal stuff, but I have to document that the gate is still here, and that means the daily fines start today." "I understand you're just doing your job," Lisa replied. "Go ahead and take your pictures." As Kevin walked around her property photographing the gate from different angles, several neighbors came out to watch. Word had spread throughout the community about Lisa's decision to fight the HOA's demands, and people were curious to see what would happen. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who walked past Lisa's house every morning, approached with her small dog on a leash. "Lisa, dear, I heard about your trouble with the new board. I think what you're doing is very brave." "Thank you." "Mrs. Chen, I'm hoping we can resolve this without too much drama." "That Shaw man came to my door last week," Mrs. Chen continued, lowering her voice. "He wanted to know if I had any complaints about your gate. I told him it was the most beautiful thing in the neighborhood and he should leave you alone." Lisa was touched by the support, but also worried. "I hope he didn't give you any trouble for saying that. Honey, I'm 83 years old. I've dealt with bullies before, and I'm not about to let some newcomer push around the nicest person on our street." Throughout that first day, Lisa received calls and visits from neighbors offering encouragement. Tom Bradley stopped by after work to check on her. Janet brought over a casserole and stayed to chat about the legal strategy. Even people she barely knew knocked on her door to express their support. But the most meaningful moment came when she found a handwritten note tucked into her gate that evening. It was from the Martinez family, whose children loved feeding her goldfish on weekends. "Dear Ms. Lisa, thank you for keeping your beautiful garden safe for everyone to enjoy. Our kids look forward to visiting your fish every week. We hope the mean HOA people leave you alone. Love, the Martinez family." The note was decorated with crayon drawings of flowers and fish clearly made by the children. Lisa felt tears in her eyes as she read it. This was exactly why she was fighting, not just for herself, but for all the families who found joy in this little corner of beauty she had created. The second day brought Lisa's first official fine notice, a bill for $200 delivered by certified mail. Amanda had warned her this would happen, and they had discussed the strategy of letting the fines accumulate while challenging their legal validity in court. "Don't pay them," Amanda had advised. "If we win our case, all the fines will be dismissed. If we pay them, it could be seen as admitting the board has the authority to impose them." But seeing that first bill still felt like a punch to the stomach. $200 was a lot of money for a nurse working night shifts. By the end of 1 week, she would owe $1,400. By the end of 1 month, the fines would total $6,000, more than she made in 2 months of work. Shaw wasn't content to let the fine process speak for itself. On the third day, Lisa came home from work to find a new sign posted at the entrance to her street. Notice: residents are reminded that all property modifications must comply with current HOA guidelines. Violations will result in significant financial penalties. The sign was clearly aimed at her, and it felt like Shaw was trying to turn the entire neighborhood against her by suggesting she was a rule breaker who was costing the community money. But Shaw's attempt to shame her seemed to backfire. Instead of turning people against Lisa, the sign made neighbors angry about the board's heavy-handed tactics. Several people called Lisa that evening to express their outrage. "It's like living in some kind of dictatorship," complained Mrs. Peterson. "Since when does the HOA get to post signs trying to intimidate individual homeowners?" By the end of the first week, Lisa owed $1,400 in fines. But she also had something she hadn't expected: a growing movement of neighbors who were fed up with Shaw's authoritarian approach to community management. Janet had started a group text chain with 18 families who were closely following Lisa's case. People were sharing stories about their own negative interactions with Shaw and his board. Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned that Shaw had threatened to fine her for planting roses in her front yard without prior approval. The Hendersons said Shaw had demanded they remove a bird feeder because it wasn't architecturally consistent with neighborhood standards. "This isn't just about Lisa's gate anymore," Tom Bradley said during an impromptu gathering in Lisa's backyard on Saturday evening. "Shaw is trying to micromanage every aspect of how we live in our own homes." Amanda Foster had good news when she called Lisa on Sunday. "I've reviewed all the documents and I'm confident we have a strong case. Shaw's board violated at least 3 different procedural requirements when they implemented their new rules. They didn't provide adequate notice, they didn't allow for community input, and they're trying to override your documented property rights." "How long will it take to resolve this in court?" Lisa asked. "That's the tricky part. The legal system moves slowly, and Shaw knows that. He's probably hoping the daily fines will pressure you into giving up before we get our day in court. We could be looking at several months before this is resolved." Several months of $200 daily fines would bankrupt Lisa long before any court ruling. Shaw's strategy was becoming clear. He was using the fine structure as a weapon to force compliance regardless of whether his demands were legally valid. But Lisa had made her decision, and she wasn't backing down. Every morning she walked outside and looked at her gate standing strong and beautiful in the morning sunlight. Every evening she watched neighbors stop to admire her flowers and take pictures of their children by the pond. The fines were scary, but losing this battle would mean losing something much more valuable than money. It would mean accepting that bullies with official titles could destroy anything that brought joy to ordinary people's lives. As the second week began, and her fine total climbed toward $3,000, Lisa reminded herself why she was fighting. It wasn't just about her gate or her garden anymore. It was about whether communities could stand up to leaders who used their power to hurt, rather than help the people they were supposed to serve. The gate stayed exactly where it belonged, and Lisa prepared for whatever Shaw would throw at her next. She was learning that sometimes the most important battles are the ones that cost the most to fight, but cost even more to lose. 2 weeks into the fine accumulation, when Lisa owed nearly $3,000 and was starting to wonder if she had bitten off more than she could chew, an unexpected phone call changed everything. "Is this Lisa Johnson, the homeowner fighting the Sunset Ridge HOA?" asked a friendly male voice. "Yes, that's me," Lisa replied cautiously. She'd been getting calls from reporters interested in her story, and she wasn't sure she wanted that kind of attention. "My name is Carlos Rivera, and I'm with the Community Rights Alliance. We're a nonprofit organization that helps homeowners fight unfair HOA practices. I read about your case in the local newspaper, and I think we might be able to help each other." Lisa had never heard of the Community Rights Alliance, but she was desperate for any kind of help. "What kind of assistance do you provide?" "We specialize in cases where HOA boards abuse their authority to harm homeowners." "Your situation fits a pattern we've been seeing more and more often: new board members who use rule changes to target specific residents for personal or political reasons." Carlos explained that his organization had been tracking Robert Shaw's activities for several months. Shaw had served on HOA boards in 2 previous communities before moving to Sunset Ridge, and both of those neighborhoods had experienced similar conflicts during his tenure. "Shaw seems to have a pattern," Carlos said. "He moves into a community, gets elected to the HOA board, then uses his position to impose his personal vision of how neighborhoods should look and function. He's particularly hostile toward homeowners who make improvements that draw positive attention." This information made Lisa's blood boil. "So he's done this to other people before?" "Oh yes. In his previous neighborhood, he forced a retired teacher to remove a little free library box that had been beloved by local children. He claimed it violated architectural standards, but everyone knew he just didn't like the attention she was getting for promoting literacy. Carlos had even more disturbing news. Shaw had a history of targeting homeowners who couldn't easily fight back: elderly residents, single mothers, people with limited financial resources. He seemed to enjoy using the power of his position to make people's lives miserable. The good news is that Shaw always makes the same mistakes, Carlos continued. He's so arrogant that he doesn't bother following proper procedures. He assumes people won't fight back, so he cuts corners on the legal requirements. The Community Rights Alliance offered to help Lisa in several ways. They could provide additional legal research, connect her with other homeowners who had fought similar battles, and help her document Shaw's pattern of abuse for potential action by state regulatory agencies. But the most exciting offer was an introduction to other Sunset Ridge residents who had been quietly dealing with Shaw's harassment, but hadn't spoken up publicly. We've been contacted by at least 6 other families in your neighborhood who are having problems with Shaw's board, Carlos revealed. They've been afraid to speak up because they didn't want to face the kind of retaliation you're experiencing. But your willingness to fight back is inspiring them to come forward. Lisa was amazed. She had felt so alone in this battle, but apparently Shaw had been making enemies throughout the community with his heavy-handed tactics. Carlos arranged a meeting for the following Saturday evening at the community center. He invited all the families who had been affected by Shaw's actions to come together and share their experiences. Lisa was nervous but excited as she walked into the meeting room that night. She was surprised to find 12 families already gathered around tables arranged in a circle. These were people she recognized from the neighborhood but had never really talked to before. As they went around the circle sharing their stories, Lisa realized that Shaw's abuse of power was much worse than she had imagined. The Williams family had been fined for hanging Christmas lights that were inconsistent with community standards, even though they had used the same lights. For 3 years without any complaints, the Patels had received violation notices for planting vegetables in their backyard because Shaw claimed food gardens were inappropriate for a residential community. Most shocking was the story told by Maria Santos, a single mother who worked 2 jobs to support her teenage daughter. Shaw had threatened to fine her for parking her second car in her own driveway, claiming it violated rules about commercial vehicles, even though Maria's car was just an older sedan she used for her weekend cleaning job. I was so scared I would lose my house, Maria said, tears in her eyes. I couldn't afford the fines he was threatening, so I sold my second car and started taking the bus to my weekend job. It adds 2 hours to my workday, but I didn't know what else to do. Each story revealed the same pattern. Shaw would target vulnerable homeowners with arbitrary rule interpretations, threaten massive fines, and refuse to allow appeals or discussion. He seemed to take particular pleasure in forcing people to undo improvements they had made to their properties. But as the group shared their experiences, something powerful began to happen. People who had felt isolated and helpless started to realize they weren't alone. The shame and fear that Shaw had been using to control them began to transform into anger and determination. We don't have to take this, declared David Kim, whose family had been harassed about the color of their front door. If we work together, we can fight back against this bully. Carlos had brought information about legal options available to groups of homeowners facing board abuse. They could file complaints with state regulatory agencies, petition for a special community meeting to challenge board decisions, or even work to recall board members who violated their fiduciary duties. The key is documentation, Carlos explained. Shaw has been getting away with this because he targets individuals who don't have the resources to fight back effectively. But when multiple families come forward with similar stories, it creates a pattern that regulators and courts take very seriously. Lisa left that meeting feeling more hopeful than she had in weeks. She wasn't just fighting for her gate anymore, she was part of a community effort to restore fairness and accountability to their neighborhood leadership. The group decided to meet weekly to coordinate their response to Shaw's abuse. They would document every violation notice, every threatening letter, and every interaction with the board. They would support each other through the legal process and share resources to make the fight more affordable for everyone. Most importantly, They would stop being afraid of Robert Shaw. Tom Bradley, who had been supporting Lisa from the beginning, summed up the group's feelings perfectly. Shaw picked the wrong neighborhood to bully. He thought he could intimidate us one by one, but he didn't count on us coming together. As Lisa walked home that night, she looked at her gate with new eyes. It wasn't just a symbol of her personal dream anymore. It had become a symbol of resistance against anyone who tried to use authority to crush the things that brought joy and beauty to people's lives. The fines were still accumulating, and the legal battle was far from over. But Lisa no longer felt like she was fighting alone. She had allies, resources, and most importantly, a cause bigger than herself. Shaw had made a critical mistake in his campaign to control the neighborhood. By targeting so many different families, he had created the very thing he was trying to prevent, a united community working together toward a common goal, and that community was just getting started. 3 weeks after forming their alliance, Lisa's group had documented dozens of violations and harassment incidents perpetrated by Shaw's board. They had filed complaints with state agencies, organized petition drives, and built a solid case for Shaw's removal from the board. But Lisa knew they needed something bigger, something that would capture the community's imagination and show everyone what their neighborhood could become. That's when inspiration struck during her morning walk through the garden. Lisa was deadheading her roses when she noticed Mrs. Chen struggling to tend her own small flower bed. The elderly woman's arthritis made it difficult for her to kneel and reach the plants in the back of her garden. As Lisa watched her neighbor's careful, painful movements, an idea began forming in her mind. What if, instead of just defending her individual property, she proposed something that would benefit the entire community? What if she could show Shaw and everyone else what real neighborhood leadership looked like? That evening, Lisa called an emergency meeting of their alliance group. When everyone gathered in Tom Bradley's living room, she stood up with a presentation folder she had spent all day preparing. "I've been thinking about our strategy," Lisa began. "We've been focused on stopping Shaw's abuse, which is important. But I think we need to show people what positive leadership looks like. We need to give the community a vision of something better." She opened her folder and pulled out hand-drawn sketches and printed research. "What if we proposed a neighborhood beautification cooperative? Not just for my property, but for the entire community." The room fell silent as people studied her drawings. Lisa had designed a connected network of small gardens, walking paths, and community spaces that would transform Sunset Ridge from an ordinary subdivision into something special. "Here's how it would work," Lisa continued, her excitement growing as she explained her vision. "Each family that wants to participate would contribute a small amount of money and volunteer time. We would create pocket gardens in common areas, plant trees along the walking trails, and establish shared spaces where neighbors could gather." David Kim looked up from the sketches. "This is ambitious, Lisa. Do you really think people would be interested in something this big?" "I think people are hungry for something positive after months of Shaw's negativity," Lisa replied. "Look around this room. We all love working in our yards and making our properties beautiful. What if we could do that together on a community level?" Maria Santos raised her hand. "I love the idea, but I can barely afford to maintain my own small yard. How would this work for families with limited resources?" Lisa had anticipated this question. The beauty of a cooperative is that everyone contributes what they can. Some people have more money, others have more time. Some are great at planning, others are better at physical work. We would design the program so that every family can participate regardless of their financial situation. Carlos Rivera, who had been attending their meetings to provide guidance, leaned forward with interest. "This is brilliant strategy, Lisa. Instead of just opposing Shaw's restrictions, you're proposing something that would make those restrictions irrelevant." Lisa nodded eagerly. "Exactly. Shaw keeps talking about community standards and uniform appearance. Well, what if our community standard was that every neighborhood should be beautiful, welcoming, and cared for by the people who live there?" Over the next 2 weeks, Lisa worked with several neighbors to develop a detailed proposal for the Sunset Ridge Beautification Cooperative. They researched costs, identified potential garden locations, and created maintenance schedules that would distribute the work fairly among participants. The proposal included several innovative features that addressed common neighborhood problems. They would plant native wildflowers in areas that were difficult to maintain, creating beautiful spaces that required minimal care. They would install small benches and reading nooks where elderly residents could rest during walks. They would create designated play areas where children could safely enjoy outdoor activities. Most importantly, they designed the program to be completely voluntary and self-funding. No one would be forced to participate, and the HOA wouldn't need to spend any community funds on the project. When the proposal was complete, Lisa requested a spot on the agenda for the next monthly HOA board meeting. Shaw tried to refuse, but Amanda Foster pointed out that community members had a legal right to address the board during public comment periods. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. Word had spread about Lisa's beautification proposal, and people were curious to see what she had in mind. Many residents who had never attended HOA meetings before showed up to hear the presentation. Shaw opened the meeting with his usual stern demeanor, clearly annoyed by the large turnout. Before we begin regular business, Ms. Johnson has requested time to address the board. I want to remind everyone that this is not a town hall meeting, and the board is not required to respond to public comments. Lisa stood up, took a deep breath, and walked to the front of the room. She had practiced this presentation dozens of times, but she still felt nervous facing Shaw's hostile stare. "Thank you for allowing me to speak," she began, projecting her voice so everyone could hear. "I'm here tonight not to complain about problems, but to propose solutions. I want to talk about how we can make Sunset Ridge the kind of community we all want to live in." She began describing her beautification cooperative plan, using poster boards to show her sketches and research. As she talked about community gardens, neighborhood gathering spaces, and shared maintenance responsibilities, she could see people in the audience leaning forward with interest. "This isn't about any individual property or any specific rule," Lisa continued. "This is about all of us working together to create something beautiful that we can all be proud of. It's about building the kind of neighborhood where children want to play outside, where elderly residents feel safe walking, and where everyone feels connected to their community." The audience was completely silent, absorbed in her presentation. Even some of the board members were taking notes and nodding along with her ideas. Lisa concluded by addressing Shaw directly. "Mr. Shaw, you've talked a lot about community standards and property values. This cooperative would raise property values throughout our neighborhood, while bringing residents together instead of driving them apart. It would create the kind of uniform beauty you say you want, but it would be achieved through cooperation rather than punishment." When Lisa finished her presentation, the room erupted in applause. People were standing up, cheering, and calling out their support for the proposal. It was the most enthusiastic response anyone had ever seen at an HOA meeting. Shaw looked uncomfortable as resident, after residents stood up to praise Lisa's vision and volunteered to participate in the cooperative. Mrs. Peterson spoke about how the project would help elderly residents stay active in the community. The Martinez family talked about how excited their children were to help plant flowers. Even residents who had been neutral in the gate controversy expressed enthusiasm for the beautification plan. Board member Patricia Wells, who had seemed sympathetic to Lisa during previous meetings, spoke up. "This is exactly the kind of positive initiative our community needs. I think we should seriously consider supporting this proposal." Shaw's face was getting redder by the minute. "The board will take Ms. Johnson's comments under advisement," he said tersely. "But I want to remind everyone that grand schemes often fail when people realize how much work they actually require." But his dismissive attitude only seemed to energize the crowd more. Person after person stood up to commit time, money, or expertise to Lisa's cooperative. By the end of the meeting, over 30 families had signed up to participate. As people filed out of the community center that night, the energy was electric. Neighbors who barely knew each other were exchanging phone numbers and making plans to work together. Children were asking their parents when they could start planting flowers. Lisa walked home feeling like something fundamental had shifted in her community. She had stopped playing defense against Shaw's attacks and had instead offered people something positive to rally around. Instead of just fighting to keep her gate, she had given her neighbors a vision of what their entire neighborhood could become. Shaw's strategy of division and intimidation was being overwhelmed by a wave of community cooperation and enthusiasm. And Lisa knew that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than anyone had imagined. 6 months after that packed community center meeting, Lisa stood in her garden on a beautiful October morning, watching dozens of neighbors working together in the pocket. gardens they had created throughout Sunset Ridge. The transformation had been nothing short of amazing. The Sunset Ridge Beautification Cooperative had grown from Lisa's desperate idea into a thriving community program that had caught the attention of city planners, local newspapers, and even a regional gardening magazine. But more importantly, it had completely changed the dynamics of their neighborhood. The turning point had come just 2 weeks after Lisa's presentation, when residents began organizing themselves without waiting for board approval. Mrs. Chen and 3 other elderly neighbors started a wisdom garden in the small common area near the community mailboxes, where they shared vegetable gardening tips with younger families. The Martinez children organized their friends to plant wildflower seeds along the walking trail. Tom Bradley and several other residents began building benches and installing bird feeders in carefully chosen locations. Shaw had tried to stop the volunteer efforts by issuing violation notices to families who were modifying common areas without authorization. But his threats backfired spectacularly. Instead of scaring people away from the beautification project, the violation notices rallied even more residents to Lisa's cause. The final blow to Shaw's authority came when Patricia Wells and 2 other board members publicly broke ranks and announced their support for the cooperative. They revealed that Shaw had been making board decisions without consulting other members and had been threatening to fine them if they opposed his agenda. Robert Shaw does not represent the values of this community, Patricia had declared at an emergency board meeting. He has abused his position to intimidate residents and block positive initiatives that would benefit everyone. The recall petition that followed gathered signatures from over 70% of Sunset Ridge residents in just 2 weeks. Shaw and his 2 remaining allies were voted out of office in a landslide election that saw the highest voter turnout in the community's history. The new board, led by Patricia Wells as president, had immediately dropped all fines against Lisa and formally apologized for the previous board's actions. They had also voted unanimously to support the beautification cooperative and provide modest community funding to help with larger projects. But the legal vindication, as satisfying as it was, paled in comparison to what had happened to the neighborhood itself. Lisa's corner property had become the crown jewel of a connected network of beautiful spaces that stretched throughout Sunset Ridge. Her original gate still stood proudly at the entrance to her garden, but now it was flanked by coordinated plantings that extended along the walking trail and connected to other pocket gardens maintained by different families. The koi pond that had started as Lisa's personal project had inspired 3 other families to create water features in their own yards. The stone pathway she had built by herself had been extended by volunteer work crews to create a continuous trail that connected all the major garden areas. Most remarkably, property values throughout Sunset Ridge had increased by an average of 12% since the cooperative began, exactly the opposite of what Shaw had predicted would happen if residents were allowed to pursue individual beautification projects. The success had attracted attention from beyond their community. City council members had visited to study their model for other neighborhoods. A regional magazine had featured Sunset Ridge in an article about grassroots community development. Real estate agents were using the cooperative as a selling point when showing homes to potential buyers. But for Lisa, the most meaningful changes were the small, everyday moments that showed how the neighborhood had become a real community. Children now played together in the various garden areas every afternoon, with older kids teaching younger ones about different plants and animals. Elderly residents had multiple places to sit and rest during their walks, and they often gathered to share stories and advice with younger neighbors. Weekend work parties had become social events where families shared meals and got to know each other better. The cooperative had also solved practical problems that had plagued the community for years. The native wildflower gardens required minimal maintenance while providing year-round beauty. The shared tool library meant families didn't have to buy expensive equipment they would only use occasionally. The coordinated planting schedule ensured that something was always blooming throughout the growing season. Lisa had even been able to expand her own garden beyond what she had originally imagined. With community support and shared resources, she had added new sections featuring different themes: a butterfly garden that attracted dozens of species, a medicinal herb garden that several neighbors used for natural remedies, and a children's discovery area where kids could plant their own small plots. As she walked through the transformed neighborhood that October morning, Lisa reflected on how much had changed since that terrible day when she received Shaw's threatening letter. She had started this journey just trying to save her gate, but she had ended up helping create something much more valuable, a community where neighbors cared about each other and worked together toward shared goals. The gate still stood exactly where it belonged, more beautiful than ever, surrounded by the expanded gardens, but now it represented something different than it had 6 months ago. Instead of being a symbol of one person's individual effort, it had become a symbol of what communities could accomplish when they rejected fear and chose cooperation instead. Mrs. Chen, now 84 and still tending her part of the wisdom garden, had perfectly captured the transformation in a comment she made to the local newspaper reporter. Lisa taught us that the most beautiful things grow when people work together instead of fighting each other. That evening, as Lisa sat on her porch with her usual cup of tea, she watched families enjoying the various garden spaces as the sun set. Children were playing hide-and-seek among the flower beds while their parents chatted on the new benches. Teenagers were taking pictures for social media. At the most photogenic spots, an elderly couple was slowly walking the connected trail system, stopping to smell different flowers and read the educational signs that had been installed by the local garden club. Lisa's phone buzzed with a text from Carlos Rivera. Saw the magazine article about Sunset Ridge. You've created something incredible there. Any interest in helping other communities start their own beautification cooperatives? Lisa smiled as she considered the possibility. She had learned so much about community organizing, legal advocacy, and cooperative leadership over the past 6 months. Maybe it was time to share those lessons with other people facing similar challenges. But first, she just wanted to enjoy this moment. Sitting in her garden surrounded by her community, watching the beautiful space they had all created together. She had started this journey as one frustrated homeowner trying to protect her personal dream. She was ending it as a community leader who had helped dozens of families create a shared vision of what their neighborhood could become. The gate that had started all this trouble stood silently in the gathering dusk, no longer a source of conflict but a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are worth fighting, not because victory is guaranteed, but because the act of standing up for what's right can inspire others to join the fight. And when enough people come together around a positive vision, even the most determined bullies have to step aside and let beauty flourish.